All right, as I sort of impatiently wait for the time to go. So I know we only have 30 minutes, so I do want to get us started here. So I just want to say a big thank you and a welcome and greetings to everyone and welcome to this session of the Generative AI Teaching Conversation webinar series. My name is Sean Leahy. I'm the Director of Creative and Emerging Technologies for Enterprise Technology here at ASU, and I'll be your host today. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Provost's office for hosting this 30-minute engaging conversation with our expert panelists from ASU here to provide an opportunity for faculty, staff, and students to engage in contemporary and emergent discussions around the use of generative AI in higher education. And for today's topic, we'll be exploring how can ASU foster a positive culture around using generative AI. And to do that, I'm joined by three amazing panelists here. So I'll quickly go around and introduce each of them in turn. First, starting with Punya Mishra. Punya is Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College here at ASU, where he leads multiple initiatives providing a future-forward, equity-driven, collaborative approach to educational research. He is internationally recognized for his work in educational technology, creativity, and the application of design to educational innovation. Welcome, Punya.
Thanks, Sean. You could have kept the bar a little lower, but that's okay. Thank you for that intro.
I was tempted to go with your micro bio.
You should have gone with the ChatGPT version of it, which is actually quite funny.
Excellent. And we're also joined again by Katina Michael. Katina is a professor in the School for Future of Innovation and Society and School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence at ASU. She's a Senior Global Futures Scientist, Director of the Society Policy Engineering Collective, and founding chair of the Masters of Public Interest Technology. She is also the founding editor-in-chief of the IEEE Sanctions on Technology and Society and senior IEEE member in the Society for the Social Implications of Technology. Welcome, Katina.
Thank you, Sean.
And then, of course, we have, last but not least, Ted Pavlik. Ted is the Associate Professor of the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence and the School of Life Sciences, and was the founding Associate Director of Research for the Biomimicry Center at ASU, and continues to be closely associated with the center. His research focuses on understanding adaptive decision-making strategies in autonomous systems. To this end, his laboratory does empirical work with natural systems, such as social insect colonies, and does engineering work building decision-making algorithms for artificial systems, such as decentralized energy management systems for the built environment. Welcome, Ted.
Thanks.
All right. So again, what an amazing panel of experts collected here today. So we're all deeply excited, I think, to hear your input and your take on a lot of these issues surrounding generative artificial intelligence. I think it's pretty well known now that the discussion around generative AI, especially in higher education, has been a highly active conversation since last fall, especially with the release of things like OpenAI's ChatGPT. And doing so, looking at all aspects of this newly accessible technology and tool set, has reached a lot of conversations around the globe. Last week, for example, this webinar series, we started off taking a closer look at understanding some of the basic, or at least some of the more fundamental operational layers of what generative AI tools are, and what kinds of tools are available and how they might be being used in higher ed and at ASU. And throughout this time, we've seen, of course, also in the popular press and news outlets, a full spectrum of responses to these tools. We've seen institutions and organizations embrace the potential to create new, authentic, and deeper learning experiences by leveraging generative AI tools in the education system. And we've also seen groups and individuals banning tools, calling for halts in developments. And of course, anytime we've been talking about artificial intelligence, there seems to be this ever-present existential conversation that looms near it. But so given that as a collective global society, though, these tools are out there, these are available. We can't put this innovation back in a bottle, so to speak. So really what I'd like to do then is sort of kick off this question. And Katina, I'd like to maybe direct this first question over to you to get this panel started, is just thinking about how at ASU, for example, can we foster a positive culture around incorporating these generative AI tools into all of the aspects of the things that we do here: teaching, learning, research, and even creative activity?
Well, the one word that comes to mind, Sean, is immersion. there's nothing like using an emerging technology, even if it's in its nascent stages, and seeing what it can do. Take it for a test drive. No one buys a car without getting in it and seeing what it can do, And so what are the ethical, legal, social implications? How does our imagination embrace such futures? What are the limits of the technology? Where can we see it being applied? And if you're not using, then you're not really understanding. And I think looking at it from a techno-social critical perspective is a great way. What are the techno futures here? And what are we doing with it today? And I think that's one way to look at it, from all the aspects that you described in the teaching, in the classroom, to come out with okay, this looks like a good tool to use at the exploratory stage, but beyond that, it sort of loses its grandeur at the moment, given where it's at. But we are seeing developments, for example, of chat GPTs, and we are looking at how we can use generative AI for imagery and the creative realm, but also for film and video, these FRAN networks that look at how you can create actors and do things like de-age and re-age. So immersion, understanding the limits of the technology, understanding the potential and the possibilities, and understanding better those exploratory fundamental questions like the ethics, the law, the social implications to come.
Yeah, that's interesting. Punya or Ted, what are your thoughts about this kind of broad? I mean, it's a very broad question, right? But thinking about what are this? How do we, Katina mentioned immersion. What are some of the other thoughts that you have about ways that we can foster this positive culture around about incorporating these tools?
Well, I guess one thing, when we talk about culture and life sciences, we often talk about, inoculating a culture plate and letting something grow. And one of the things that when we talk about ethics, I think it is important to think about ethics and the use of technology in general, whether it be ChatGPT or an elevator. But I guess the question I would have is can we get useful examples of unethical use? And so right now, I think we need to kind of loosen our constraints a bit. Right now, it sounds like, for a lot of people, if you use text generated by ChatGPT, then they say that's tantamount to plagiarism or something like that. And I guess that's one place we could start, but it does seem like there's a little bit of a category error there, because it isn't exactly the same. I mean, ChatGPT is sort of, it comes out of this idea of text completion effectively, the same sort of things that in the end people had no problem with going to Google and type in 3 words and see how it completes the next 3 words. And people would play these games and things. And that was sort of a fun activity to sort of, and to think about, wow, that's weird that these strings of words came up. And we need that type of culture around the sort of ChatGPT 2, in order for us to then start really asking the questions of, all right, well then what is really the unethical? Maybe an unethical use is to use ChatGPT without any editing to submit a letter to an insurance company justifying why a doctor prescribed a particular medication. Well, that goes beyond just simply using the text of ChatGPT. I mean, there was a joke earlier Punya made about, shortening his bio with the ChatGPT version. And I don't think any of us would say that would be an unethical version, an unethical way to use ChatGPT. So I think just, we need to sort of start embracing just use and loosening our definitions of what it means to be unethical when you're using these tools.
So if I can just jump on that. I mean, firstly, if you haven't seen the bio, I asked Bing Chat or whatever to create a humorous self-deprecating bio of me, and it is hilarious. I mean, some of the comments it made were like actually cut to the bone about how close they were to, pain points. But I think the points that have been raised around immersion, around playing with it, around imagination, and thinking of creative use cases, I think is sort of critical at this juncture of time, right? So I'm just thinking of, I recently heard from one of my colleagues that his son prepared for a chemistry exam using ChatGPT by entering in the content that the teacher said was going to be in the exam and asked ChatGPT to ask him questions. Now, that's such a beautiful example of how this technology can be used. So that is completely ethical as far as I can see, but takes advantage of the generative capability of that tool in a really powerful way. And I think the same goes for in the area of media and the arts, where we can see the flowering of new genres of experimentation and play. I mean, cinema, television, and now what kind of new media will emerge from this. So there is a strong positive sort of an aspect to it. I think at this point in time, we are sort of just at the beginning of what this could be. So there is a positive piece on that. And there are other aspects too, which I think we will get to when we look at some of the other, concerns that we can have with these tools as well.
Yeah, I do often wonder too, right? With also just sort of while people who have been working with these tools for quite some time have had time to really push on the boundaries of what is possible, like what can it do, what can it not do, but all of a sudden we have this explosion of, it's in the hands of everybody, so to speak, who wants to get it. And then there's a lot of speculation around it. What, like Ted, I think you had mentioned, right? There's like, that you're just kind of putting a label that if it's used, therefore it is in some category. And so also trying to understand, right, as we build this sort of culture around using it in immersive experiences of having opportunities to play and push and find those, what are the affordances and constraints of these things? I do want to kind of move on to a question that was, it's a question that we have here, but it was also already briefly sort of touched on, and that's kind of the idea around some of the ethical considerations of using these. So addressing some of those sort of major concerns and challenges. So keeping up with this culture, this positive culture around incorporating it, will take an ongoing commitment. As we know, these tools are rapidly evolving. There's new ones all the time coming out. And really thinking about, it'll take this sort of consistency of us playing and learning and exploring with them. But so Punya, maybe if I could have you start us off with this question, thinking about knowing that it is a fast-moving technology and development. How do we approach this technology and maybe others, right, with an open mind and this commitment to ethical use, knowing that a lot of times, and I think we talked about this maybe last week as well, that the technological developments usually far outpace regulatory frameworks and things like that. So how do we do that, or how do we approach this with an ethical lens of, experimentation, but also keeping those sort of ethical concerns of those usages, at top of mind as well?
Sure. So I think, because we are ASU and everything has the label of innovation associated with it, I think the themes that emerge from what Katrina and Ted and I sort of spoke about for the first response speak to that piece. But I think I want to address, a new sort of aspect that we have brought into our design aspirations just a few months ago, that of principled innovation. And I think, and to me, that's a really powerful sort of an idea, because it says just because we can do something, are we thinking of the ethical implications, the implications of these technologies? And, I love that example that you gave of an elevator. Because if you think about it, a staircase is a technology, but the moment you build a staircase, there's a power you can build up. However, the moment you do that, you have now relegated a certain group of people to being disabled because they cannot climb the stairs, right? And so then you have to create. So that's always been the story of technology. It has always given to some while taken away from others. And we often don't think about who it has taken away from. We often don't think about who are the people who this technology is marginalizing, whose voices are not being heard. And typically, and you can see that happen during the COVID-19 pandemic, that the effect of the pandemic were felt very differently on different groups of people, depending on prior and existing inequities that were in our society. And so the question for me then becomes, which is why this sort of idea of principled innovation, which at its heart is a sort of a humanistic perspective that brings multiple voices in, is always asking ourselves, what are the implications of this, not just for me, but for society at large? I think are really, really important. It's an important framework for me that ASU has taken on this design aspiration, because I think it speaks to our commitment to the ethical use of these tools and technologies, even while experimenting with them and playing with them. One of the things I was thinking of, and I think I mentioned this before, that, if I have to do a study with one person, that I have to interview them for, a paper that I want to write, I have to get IRB approval. What OpenAI did was a global experiment with no guardrails, right? I mean, would a principled innovation framework have possibly said, let's go a little slower on this and think about testing it out before? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that I think ASU is particularly well positioned to ask, because A, we have credibility in the innovation space, but we also bring a core sort of set of values to the work that we do. And I think that's a very important piece of that conversation that I think we lead, and we should continue to lead in that. Oh, one final thing, a shout out to the Teachers College, because the PI work emerged from over 6 years of work here. So want to take a little bit of credit for the College of Ed here.
Well, that college is awesome, Punya, absolutely awesome. And the amazing work that's coming out of that with respect to futures and learning is wspectacular. Dovetailing on that, I totally agree. I mean, emerging technologies are coming out all the time. They're pushing the boundaries. We have implantable solutions today. Who knows what we'll have tomorrow? The question is, can you prejudge ethics? Coming back to your main statement there, Sean, that provocative statement, what do we do about ethics? And there are two schools of thought. One is, you can only understand ethics once you start to use something. You can point your finger at it and say, oh, that's bad or that's good, but that's too simplistic for these new complex emerging technologies. And what we're saying now, singing the songs of Punya's and Punya's team, is how do you embed ethics in the design process? We talk about responsible innovation in our School for the Future of Innovation in Society. We talk about ELSI, the ethical, legal, social implications. You talk about ethical alignment by design, value-sensitive design, value-based design. All of these design processes now are embedding ethics at the heart of the innovation process. What are the risks? Can we treat those risks? If we can't, then that particular feature set, stays on a dormant list of potential features. But this is highly embedded in the design process. And those of us who are in the innovation space now want to use human-centered design processes. I mean, that's the big talk in the AI industry at the moment. Is this a human-centered design process? Are we looking at the social and technical and the environment ecosystem at large? And are we looking at the balance within this kind of these subsystems that exist? If we're not treating ethics as an embedded part of the process of development, then we've failed as engineers, as innovation experts, as computational people. But I think now, everyone knows values are very important in the design process.
I think these have all been great sentiments, and there's not a whole lot I could add to these comments. I will say that along with keeping sort of the primacy of this sort of these ethical considerations, is to also think about. I mean, I love the juxtaposition there of the staircase and the elevator, and I think that I've recently met a lot of students who English has been their second language, for example, and they have these large language models have totally changed the way in which they communicate with the outside world, whether it be writing a cover letter, I mean they're or just simply trying to learn the syntax. They can say, well, I need a paragraph that sort of says this. And then after they see it written, and that's the beauty of these large language models, they include all the nuances. They end up learning in a different way. And so I think, if we target our innovation toward equity, toward diversity, towards inclusion, we have a greater chance of leaving more in than leaving more out. And I think that if slowing down completely would be a lot like noticing that there's a drug in our phase 1 trials that is having a positive impact on a group, and then not changing how we're allocating. I mean, eventually, once you notice that there is a positive effect, it becomes unethical not to maybe shrink your control group and grow your treatment group. And so, we need to sort of be thinking about that also with these technologies, that notice the good that they're doing along with the bad, and then try to move toward the good, as opposed to just slowing things down just because of the bad.
Right. So if I can add just one thing
Sure.
to the points that have been made, I've been thinking a lot lately about what people have been describing as the alignment problem, which is, typically talked about in AI as, that you set a certain goal for an AI system, and that's not exactly what you had in mind, and the AI could go up, the paperclip issue or whatever, the problem and so on. But I think one of the things that these AI systems have also done, in my mind, is reveal alignment problems in what we have been doing normally in the first place, right? So the example of plagiarism in writing college essays, for instance, is that we always took that, there was an alignment problem there in the first place, which is, how do we get at what students know? And we said, oh, we're going to make them write a paper. Now, is that an accurate and a good representation of a student's knowledge and it's, and as a performance of their understanding? Maybe not. And what AI has done is inserted itself into that alignment problem and said, hey, I can write that paper for you, which pushes us, I think, as educators to start thinking about how can we create better performances of understanding than just writing a standard 5-paragraph essay. So I think that's been a very interesting sort of thing for me to think about, that how this technology is actually making us question things that we sort of just took for granted. So I think that's an interesting piece there as well.
Punya, on those points, we've been talking with yourself and Ted and Sean about the front end of the applications of generative AI. But when you start to look at the back end in the production of these systems, Punya, you called it an open experiment. Of course, it's open AI. Do it and ask permission later, or let's see how far we can push regulation. And this actually has a lot to do with the underlying ethics of the sources of information that OpenAI has currently poured into, which we have limited knowledge about, to be honest. We don't know the authorship of the content. We have no log or audit trail or blockchain of the actual quotations. We don't know if somebody asked the same questions, whether they will get the same responses back, give or take. That it seems to be the case that they will. But there's a lot that we don't know. And I know that from reading information about the development of the future of these tools, that they will gain licenses with peer-reviewed content providers. They will start to garner additional information, whether that's images that are available, just like Clearview AI is scraping 10 billion images off the internet. We want to know more about the back end of this system. And that does have a lot to do with equity, accessibility. I know I took ChatGPT 3 for a run in November and December, and I was asking it a lot about digital mental health issues. I took on the persona of someone who was having a mental health crisis and started to drill in to see how far it would go, whether it would recommend for me people I should see in Arizona, whether it would do anything like take action if I said I was going to commit suicide. And I really pushed the boundaries of that discussion, and it led to me not having access. I still don't have access, by the way.
Oh,
so the interesting question is, and one of the excuses that came up was there were too many simultaneous users. And I thought to myself, well, is it the fact that I'm here in New South Wales, Australia, or is something else going on here? And sharing this story with academics in Europe, they've received the same kind of denial of service, and that's what I'm going to call it, a denial of service attack. So in some ways, what I'm going to suggest here is that if we want everything to be open, then it's open access, and it's not actually going to be, yes, you can have the free access, you can have the platinum because you can afford it, and you can have no access because you're just a jerk. So the question then becomes one of, if we start to build infrastructure, an ecosystem around its availability. And Ted, I'm with you. I've heard people in this library say, I feel better since ChatGPT has come on because I can submit better assignments. And they're not saying, it's a secret. They're even telling their lecturers that's what they're doing. And lecturers have no response. But at the same time, accessibility, those people for whom English is a second language, may be relying on this in every facet of their life to do basic things in a foreign country. But what happens when you don't have access? And that's the ethics of the production side I want us to think about. So it's not just the applications, it's what's happening on the back end and that system of innovation that's forming around AI and beyond.
Yeah, no, Katina, that's a really interesting point. And also want to remember that a lot of these platforms and services that are out there are not there for free. They might be a free option that you can do. I mean, even OpenAI, for example, right? I mean, when the organization was founded, it was intended to be, AI built in the open so that we wouldn't have these sort of proprietary, black boxes of technology. But then that changed and it became a for-profit organization. And that's the issue you raised, that I think a really interesting conversation point too, around the ethics of access too, right? Like when especially as potentially as things kind of move on and continue, and certain people are advantaged by the use of these technologies to do things, to get, whether that be through employment or in academic endeavors or whatever it might be, right? Like even right now, the difference between ChatGPT 3.5, which is sort of like the free version that you have access, but if you want the latest and greatest, you have to pay, I think, what is it, $20 a month? I mean, that is something that a lot of households cannot afford. So then already, even with this rush, there's the free version and then there's the paid version, which is already sort of setting sort of an inequity there as well.
But I just want to, can I just combine to something that Punya and Katina just, said there. I don't think it's just about the price, because I think that, we can't do a whole lot about the price of ChatGPT, but combining something with what Punya just said about, our expectation as faculty, for example, that the way in which we assess students is by having them write an essay. Not only is that sort of, maybe going to be, maybe that this really has exposed that that's always been sort of a silly way to assess students. And just like, when Midjourney and these other image, generation tools came out, people said, oh no, now we can't trust a photo anymore. And so, you never should have trusted a photo. Photos, ever since photos were made, were not necessarily trustable things. And so I guess the question about access is not only are these tools creating these barriers, because I think, but they're also, are we, when we ask for certain things, are we disproportionately creating problems from one population than another? Because there always will be some populations that have access to these tools and not. So maybe we can figure out as faculty at a university here better ways to assess students that don't disproportionately, benefit one group over another.
Thank you, Ted, for that. And I think, we talk about the economics of access. I think there is another deeper economic fact that we need to be thinking about. And this, I heard this somewhere, and I thought this was really interesting, that apart from the book publishing business, almost every other media business is based on advertising. And now if you think about what these tools can do in terms of persuasion and so on, being these having character and personality as a chatbot, to build that through an advertising model, which is really about getting you to stick to, I mean, if you think about what happened with YouTube and a lot of these social media channels, which really became about making you stick on the website and hence taking you more and more down the rabbit hole of weirdness. So those are the kinds of things I really worry about. Is the fundamental economic model going to be, because these things cost money, how is it going to be sustainable? And if it's going to be an advertising-based model, I really worry about that. Because that to me it is an alignment problem. I used to tell my kids, like when they used to watch TV, I'm like, what are you really watching? I said, the real thing you're watching are the commercials. The stuff in between is just to make you watch the commercials. You know what I mean? Like so I think we need to be thinking about sort of the fundamental economic models that are going to underlie how these tools are going to be used. And I think there's a huge sort of an alignment problem there as well.
Punya, it's not going to take long to embed advertising into the free version of ChatGPT. I'll give you a basic example. I thought asking for a list of psychologists in a particular area would be easy through ChatGPT. So I said, I'm looking for psychiatrists and psychologists in Tempe, Arizona. Can you give me a list? And ChatGPT responds, I'm sorry, I don't do directories. Pretty much you can see that in the chat, in that conversation. So, okay, I thought, well, is it going to take long? Do psychologists promote themselves with good SEO on the internet? Well, of course they do. Even big platforms like Psychology Today, there are YouTube clips. You can see how you can put yourself higher as a psychologist or psychiatrist on the list from a response, from a query, from an everyday user. So how long will it be before Katina Michael's name, is up higher as a potential psychiatrist, or Punya Mishra or Theodore Pavlich, based on that advertising model? And the free version will be based on advertising. The paid version, as we see with other examples out there, won't be. But this then becomes a source of threat for this open tool, because how open is it? How predictable is it? How honest is it in giving me the information I require? So imagine Wikipedia was ruled by advertisements. Is this what ChatGPT might well do in the near future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept too, because that's a challenge that is persistent, right? Also, right now not knowing how those models are trained specifically, but also if we can learn those, how can those be gamed, right, to intentionally overweight something in terms of its importance and things like that. So I am looking at the time. I can't. 30 minutes has like come and gone so fast. It's been insane. It's been an absolute. But I would just wonder if anyone of our panelists has any final thoughts you want to share quickly before we wrap up and sign off for today.
I think I just want to riff off of exactly what Katina said, and is that it would be interesting to know what are other business models there, and if ChatGPT is supposedly this disruptionary force, then you might imagine, well, maybe it's a public good. And so maybe there's a way to, maybe like Wikipedia, it's a donation model. Maybe we need kind of a national public radio chatbot or something like that. So I don't know. I just think that's a really interesting thought to maybe end on, is like to think about alternative models for public goods, public AI public goods in the future.
I couldn't have said it better. I think that's a perfect way of thinking about these technologies, because, one thing that I sort of think about is, we talk about these technologies through metaphors and so on, and then they come back and influence how we think about ourselves. And I think there is and unless and until we think of better models for the economics of it, because that's what's going to drive it down the road. And I love this idea of a sort of a public model for this. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think that's what SFIS built in the master's program, a public interest technology good, right, or service. So I'm just going to give a plug there to our master's program. It is, Theodore and Punya, as you say, public interest tech through and through.
There we go. That's a perfect way to bring it all the way back for that. So thank you all so much. Katina, Ted, Punya, thank you so much for your time today. It looks like we do have a quick question in the chat. Let's see, I'll go ahead and read this out. If anyone wants to take a read at that and see if you can, if you want to take a stab at answering that, that would be great. But again, just thank you so much for everybody joining us today. On behalf of myself and the entire expert panel, thank you for joining us on this generative AI teaching conversation. Special thank you to Sarah Elliott and Allison Hall for helping administer and run all the things and run the Zoom background here for us, making sure that all of these things run smoothly. We really appreciate that. So we hope you've enjoyed your time with us today. I know 30 minutes went by really fast. If you're interested in learning more, please check the events calendar for future webinars and related sessions, or CAP if you, well, you wouldn't know it now, but there's also, you can catch, if you've missed any, you can always catch them where we'll post the recordings. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you can come back. Hope we can continue these conversations at another time. And so from me and from everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you very much. We'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Katina.
Bye. Thank you.
Great to meet
Punya
you.
and Ted.
This was always
Thanks,
fun.
everybody. It's great.
Yeah.